NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP.
Welcome, viewers. It's fall of 2020, and in today's National Writing Project CoLab, we're talking with Katherine Schulten of the New York Times Learning Network. The National Writing Project has been working with student argument for a long time, the topic of today's CoLab. And through the College, Career, and Community Writers Program, we've reached thousands of teachers, tens of thousands of students. And as usual, students lead the way, showing adults how to be passionate, thoughtful, and respectful in civic discourse. At the New York Times Learning Networks, Katherine Schulten and her colleagues have chosen 100 student arguments and published them in a book called Student Voice, available from Norton, and Katherine's holding up the cover of the book right there. These essays came from contests that the New York Times Learning Network held over a period of 5 years. And these are the winners and the runner-ups. And I bet you can't tell which ones are which.
I really can't. Yeah.
On today's shows, then, we'll hear about the work of the New York Times Learning Network. And best of all, hear selections from some of the students. So my guest today, Katherine Schulten, was editor-in-chief at the New York Times Learning Network for a period of time. 19, how many years, Katherine?
14. Oh,
14
12 and a half when I was editor-in-chief, yeah.
All right, editor-in-chief, she still is working there. And before coming to the Times, she spent 19 years as an English teacher in the New York City school system and was a teacher consultant for the New York City Writing Project. So she's one of us. So welcome, Katherine. I'm so pleased to have you here and eager to hear about this work. So if you could start us off by telling us a little bit about the New York Times Learning Network.
Sure. Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. As I always say, the Writing Project raised me. I student taught with Paul Allison, who was a Writing Project person back when I was about 22 years old. And that very summer, or the next summer, I did a Writing Project program in the Bronx and never looked back. So love to talk to the Writing Project. So the Learning Network, if you don't know it, the whole purpose of our site is to help people teach and learn with Times content. And we've been around over 20 years now, but when I took over in 2006, it was a brown website. I don't know, that was our color scheme, and it was brown in all ways. It was a 1998 created thing that basically churned out a lesson plan a day, which was useful, but 14 years on, it's gone through a couple different iterations, and we're not at all focused on giving teachers stuff as much as we are focused on inviting kids all over the world into a conversation about what's going on. Of course, front page news, everything that's battering all of us right now with the constant news cycle, but much more than that, just inviting them into the whole conversation, anything the Times could cover. So it could be politics, sports, fashion, TikTok videos, science, food, whatever it is. And we do that in a couple of ways. One, since 2009, we have posted a writing prompt every single day that's based on something in the Times. And, it could be like the death penalty one day, but it could be like, I don't know, your grandmother's cooking the next day. So it's kind of all over the map. And that's obviously like low stakes kind of writing, and kids all over the world come on and have their say. But we also run all these contests, one of which is the source of this book. So that's
that.
Yeah.
I know that Writing Project teachers love the Learning Network and use it constantly. You can see it in posts and all kinds of ways. And one of the things we found in our work with argument writing is the circle of interest of even middle school to high school is the same circle of interest as adults. Like they talk about the things we care about too. It's not like there's like a whole alternate universe there. So I'm not surprised that Times content speaks to students and students speak to Times content.
Yeah, people constantly are asking, thinking that our site has some special magic where we rewrite the news for kids. And we're like, no, it's for 13 and up. And our feeling is, there's anybody, the Times is for everybody. And there's, it's not like the print paper your grandfather read. There's all kinds of ways into the paper, all kinds of visual stuff and podcasts and, so there's something for everybody.
Well, there's always, this funny phrase about bringing the real world into your classroom. And, our stance has been the real world is already in your classroom. You don't have to bring it in. It's already there.
Would that every teacher thought that, but yes.
So tell us how this book, came to be and what your ideas were and your hopes for it.
Yeah. So let me show it again. And the reason why is it's not just the essays that are by kids. This cover illustration is also by a 16-year-old. And I love it so much. Anyway, it came about because back in 2014, we decided to run this student editorial contest, and it was immediately super popular. And at this point, we get 10,000 essays every year, and it has to go through 7 rounds of judging. We have something like 45 judges, and those judges are, journalists from the Times newsroom, but also we always get volunteers from the opinion page who come help us judge. So to win this contest or to place, we usually have about 50 kids we honor in some way. These are good essays. So we, eventually these ended up in print, and an editor at Norton saw them in print and said, wow, I want to read more of these. And that's the short version of how it became a book. But just so people can understand, the context when they look at them, the basic rule is they're all 450 words each. There's not much to it except kids can write about whatever they want as long as they can make us care as readers. It has to be evidence-based. They have to use at least one Times source and one source that's not from the New York Times. Most kids use many more than that, but they have to at least tell us about that. And I'll tell you a tiny little story about its evolution, because I think maybe if the people listening to this who care about argument might have gone through some of the same thing, which is we had all kinds of contests on our site, and it asked kids to write poetry and make videos and do podcasts and, all kinds of things. When we started this contest, it's because all of us are former teachers, and we knew the Common Core standards had just become a thing. And we saw that argument was everywhere. And of course, our job is to get people to teach with the Times, and we publish a daily opinion section. So that was obvious, but we were so sure that we were going to get the most dutiful paint by numbers, stuff. We just didn't think it would be we didn't think argument said fun to kids. It wasn't like your personal essay or whatever. But that first year, I think we honored maybe 8 winners, and one of them was this kid who I'm still in touch with, and he's in the book I wrote. This kid, Noah Spencer, who's a Canadian kid who wanted to write about gender equity and, et cetera. But his headline has been imitated by kids ever since. And it was the headline that kind of, I think, showed us that you could do this in an interesting way and kids would. He called his essay, Why I, a Heterosexual Teenage Boy, Want to See More Men in Speedos. And everyone loved it. The essay is an excellent essay, but just that he kind of had the nerve to send something in with that. And kids have imitated that ever since. We get essays every year with that same basic construction. But I think it kind of opened things up, and kids realized they could write about what they want, kind of how they wanted. This wasn't a standardized test. This was a real audience who they needed to get interested. So
I think students really do think it's fun. I mean, that's been our experience too.
Really?
In C3WP is that the classroom is loud. They're talking all the time. They're interested. They're engaged. I think argument writing kind of has a bad rap. And as a freshman comp teacher in college, maybe it's our fault. I don't know. I always tried to be fun, but there is sort of a bad reputation for it that I think is not shared by students. I think they really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what all the teachers, the second book, it's 2 books really. It's a collection of essays, and then it's a teacher's guide to those essays. Yeah, that is basically me asking every single kid I could get hold of to tell me about their writing process, every kid that won. And then a bunch of teachers who teach with the contest giving their advice. And then I also talked to some people on the opinion page, like Nick Kristoff, who's always such a gent and will happily save time for the Learning Network at any time. And so it's a kind of mishmash of advice. Where was I going with that? I don't know. Teachers saying that it's just what you said, that when they get into it, kids love it. So yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple of things you've noticed about student, that it's lively and that it's not formulaic. I didn't see a lot of 5 paragraphs themes. I'm sure we could find one, but maybe it's because it needs 5 paragraphs. But I think I'd be interested in more about what impressed you about these student arguments, and yeah.
Well, first, one thing I just want to say about the book itself, I think anybody watching this video, and certainly you and me, stay impressed by kids, right? Like, that's why we're in the business. We're always surprised by them, and we're always learning new things. And kind of, to me, a teenage point of view, if honest and well expressed, is automatically just fascinating, right? So letting kids know that they can do that is great. And I took a sheaf of these essays to a school where I barely knew the teachers. I knew them from online, and they said, "Oh, we study argument. You can try them out in our class." So I brought a bunch of essays up to the school in upstate New York, and it was kind of like, the teachers divided the kids into groups, and they were all reading them and discussing, and I was walking around listening in. And this one kid said, "We've been studying argument this whole semester, but everything we read," and this is a quote from the kid, he said, "is by like 50-year-old white guys who do this for a living their whole life, And he's like, "It's so great to read these. Like, they're not like perfect. I don't feel like I have to have a graduate degree to like achieve this,
right.
And they're like things I'm interested in." So I was like, thank you, kid. My rationale, given to me on a plate.
Right.
But yeah, so that's what I like. Really what impresses me is, like, you have 450 words. You have to make a really strong argument about something that you can support, and do it with a little bit of voice and style. Like, could I have pulled that off at 16? I don't think so. So, right?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't think I was asked to at age 16. So, unless you ask, you don't know if you can do it or not.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Why don't you take us into some of these essays, some of your favorites? I'm sure that all 100 of them are your favorites, but you had to choose some. So if you could share with us some of the student writing, that would be great.
All right, I want to preface it a little bit by saying, because I want to share 3, I think, with you guys. And believe me, the part where I had to pick what to share was maybe a day of work for me, because it's just what you said. I love them all for different reasons. There are a few in there that are 5-paragraph essays. Maybe the thesis sentence is even at the last line of the first paragraph, the kind of thing that kids absorb in middle school, early high school. But few of them are like that. But the one thing that I want to make sure to say in this interview, and kind of to introduce what I'm about to read to you, is a point that we've started to make to kids after we're now 7 years. This book is actually, I think, 7 years of the contest, and this will be our 8th, right? So what we've started to realize is that we need to say to kids, and I don't think they believe us, all of them, what we're interested in is what you have authority on. Do not write to us about something that you think you should write about. One of the teachers whose work is throughout the teacher guide of this, he's like the backbone of it, is this guy, Cabby Hong, who teaches in Wisconsin. His kids often place, and he gets his kids' work out into the world in all kinds of ways, and ours is just one of them. But he says that he's always going around listening to kids, and they'll be telling him their topic, and he'll say, "You're not a fellow at the Brookings Institute. You're a 16-year-old kid. Like, think about something that you actually have authority on, or a stake in, or experience with, and your essay is going to have that much more, it's going to sound and feel and be real." And when we had Nick Kristoff we had a webinar with him where he actually said that to kids. He said, if you're a student athlete, you have authority on that, right? If you're a musician, you have authority. If you're like a kid in a blended family, you have something to say about that. You have a part-time job. There's all kinds of ways you can bring your lived experience in, and it's evidence. So throughout this book, go ahead.
I just have a funny story. You just
Yeah.
reminded me of a funny story teaching that I was, I had a portion of my course, this is the freshman college course, that really was turned over to student interest and student arguments. So the majority of it. So, and I knew that like getting the right topic was like kind of critical. The wrong topic is probably bad writing, and a good topic. So there was a young woman in my class and she was studying like Star Wars, the arms thing where they were going to have like lasers in the sky or something to shoot down missiles. That was like a shield. And it was
Okay.
a scientific thing. And I thought, she's just reading the news. That's just not. So I sit down and talk to her. I go, are you sure you want to write about this? This is something you really care about? She looks at me like a completely crazy person, like you crazy adult. And she goes, well, I don't want to die. And that put me in my place like, okay, yeah, go. I don't
Yeah, those are the stakes. Then
just
they
work
have
on this and come up with something good because I don't want to die either.
no, but that's really true. Like so much of the stuff, like every year when our judges get this stuff, the feedback we mostly get is like, my God, I didn't know any of this. Like I remember vividly early on, and now this is some of this stuff now, the book's out, like things age quickly and you already know this, but like sort of the canary in the coal mine about kids and their desire to rid the stigma of mental health, right? We started getting tons of essays about like how bad mental health support in school was, how important it was. Now you see that everywhere. But when that first started coming into our interview, I had not read it anywhere. Yeah. Same with well before Parkland, we were hearing from kids about how screwed up the those lockdown drills are and how freaky and they don't work. And, like we feel like we always learn something new. One of my favorites is a kid writing about like how toxic the chat is in video games. Yeah. Like you'd have to be a gamer with a political lens kind of to name that and do research around it. And, anyway, we learned a ton from kids every year on this stuff. So
let's hear some.
Okay, yeah. So I want to introduce the one that, when you think about why do you do argument writing, right? Like for a standardized test, sure, okay. But really the goal for a newspaper or for our contest is to change things, right? To make people understand something they didn't understand. So when I took those essays up to upstate New York school and showed them to a bunch of kids and they read a bunch, this was easily their favorite, hands down. All the classes I taught that day or worked with that day. And they all said, wow, we didn't know this. And, this is going to change how we think about this kind of situation. And so in that one it's called, I'm going to actually read, maybe not all of it, but enough to give you a flavor. It's by a young woman named Asaka Park. And I'm reading from the book. It's called I'm a Disabled Teenager and Social Media is My Lifeline. And she was 17 when she wrote it. It says, I'm keenly attuned to the unwritten rules of social interaction. I can identify the subtle variations in people's facial expressions, and I'm quick to read between the lines. And my discernment is not just on an intellectual level, but also on an intuitive level. I'm intimately familiar with the dance of social interaction. The information I just provided sounds like a mundanity until I tell you I was diagnosed with autism. I defy the stereotypes of somebody who can't possibly get it socially. Nobody knows that I can, but I can get it. Of course, people don't see that. I struggle with impulsivity. My physical clumsiness makes it hard for me to maintain appropriate facial expressions and tone of voice. While I easily grasp abstract concepts, I often can't convert them into tangible step-by-step actions, making it difficult to communicate gracefully. Even the untrained eye notices these challenges, and they confound my social faux pas as a failure to understand or share other people's expectations. I'm depleted. Every day at school, I isolate myself from most of my peers. It's a matter of time before they make these assumptions, before they postulate how my brain works. But on social media, I'm a completely different person. I'm dynamic, I'm assertive, I'm people-oriented. And then she goes on for several more paragraphs. If you're thinking, how's she embedding evidence? She goes on to talk about disability and how it's seen, and what the internet can do, and how she uses emojis, and that defies her own physical movements. And anyway, the kids in these junior classes I was working with were like, I never thought about any of that. It makes me rethink autistic people or people with any kind of disability. And they just were very moved by it. So
I think it helps us rethink the stance towards social media as well.
Well, that's part of her argument is like adult, there's a whole chapter in the book where kids are like, shut up, adults, about social media. Here's why it's, useful and interesting and not just evil for teenage brains or whatever. So she's one of those. But I wanted to show a very short video. When I first asked her if I could interview her, she said, well, as you know from my essay, I'm not going to be comfortable talking to you. This was maybe a year and a half ago. So I'll answer your questions only via email. But then fast forward a year, she's in this book, and I said, would you make a video? She said, okay. So I was very happy to get this from her. And if you can play it, you guys can all meet Asaka.
I think I can. So let's go.
My name is Asaka Park, and I wrote the editorial. I'm a disabled teenager, and social media is my lifeline. In full disclosure, I'm literally reading from a script, and I've rehearsed this at least 10 times. So when I first wrote that piece, I wrote it out of desperation. In hindsight, it's not my most uplifting piece, but there's a sense of urgency, this sense of momentum, and there's power in that, I think. I'm glad that I turned my pain into something productive and something that starts a broader conversation instead of just keeping it inside.
There you have it.
There you have it.
Yeah.
Invites a broader conversation. I mean,
yeah.
The way she thinks big about her writing is impressive.
Yeah. And I don't know, you don't think of, I suspect a lot, some of these are kind of lighthearted, there's a girl making an argument about why pineapple pizza deserves more respect, we have all kinds of arguments in this book, but there are quite a few where it's really out of a painful, they're revealing themselves in some way that you think you associate more with a personal essay, but you can see that it's got a lot of power, it's the ethos and the pathos,
right?
Both. So yeah.
I was impressed with the 2-word sentence, I'm depleted. That was quite moving, skillful.
Yeah. So should I give you a couple more?
Yeah, a couple more. Let's get a flavor of the range.
Yeah, I picked a couple. I don't know when people will get to this, but they're very timely right now. So that's how I chose them. But keep in mind, overall what we're looking for as judges and what really gets me about these is 450 words. You've got to pick something that you can argue that's small enough for 450 words. What we don't want is, and what we get much of, I have to say, is I'm gonna, the whole world should be more concerned about climate change, some huge thing. 450 words, it's a real cut and paste job. It's not, there's nothing in it that tells me why you're writing it. So the ones I'm going to read to you, not only is it an argument that they can make in 450 words and you understand why they're making it, but they weave in evidence in a kind of graceful way. And, especially you'll hear in different ways, but there's voice, there's stylistic flourishes, they're just pulling off a lot here, I think. So the first one is by a 15-year-old girl from I think the 2018 contest. Her name's Bridget Smith, and the name of the essay is Dinner Table Politics, and you'll see why it's seasonally timely. The Thanksgiving table is a war zone. The soldiers, the conservative aunt who drove all the way from Alabama, the ultra-progressive sibling who makes passive-aggressive comments while passing the potatoes, and of course, the grandparents who stubbornly reference the good old days when political incorrectness roamed free. Throughout America, families hunker down for the holidays with reluctance and trepidation. Civil conversation concerning the issues facing our country is becoming rarer by the day. But if we can't talk about the issues, how can we fix them? The Thanksgiving table is a microcosm of the real world discussions in local and state governments, in Washington, in the White House itself. Americans must learn how to talk to each other about politics, from the dinner table to the Oval Office. I've had my fair share of political discourse with friends and family. These conversations escalate quickly and infuriate easily, but haven't destroyed my relationships. I listen, disagree, and discuss. However, when faced with opposing viewpoints, many Americans polarize further. Instead of talking to those with whom they disagree, Americans find like-minded individuals who cater to their political tastes. In fact, according to the New York Times, quote, liberals and conservatives prefer to associate and live near their fellow partisans, and quote, would be unhappy if their children married someone with a different political viewpoint. This is troubling. We develop empathy when we talk with people from different backgrounds who challenge our beliefs. Our lack of conversation has turned us into our own rigid, stubborn grandparents, unwilling to consider alternate views. According to Pew Research, 38% of Democrats have consistently liberal views, a dramatic increase from 1994 when only 8% remained consistently liberal. America's lack of political plasticity is growing rapidly, creating a chasm between things we support and things we don't. We see this divide every year at the Thanksgiving table. If we can't set aside what we think we know and talk to our stubborn grandparents, we become them. We remain entrenched and the gravy gets cold. Talking to people we disagree with is hard, but it should be easier to disagree with the people we love. Talking to family is a starting point to bridge that political chasm. Ask your aunt why she feels that way. Ask your grandparents what shapes their beliefs. Ask your siblings to suggest solutions. If we can empathize with our family at the Thanksgiving table, we can empathize with our neighbors, friends, and political representatives. Don't let your dinner table become a war zone. Talk to your fellow Americans. Ask them questions, invite them to dinner, and show up and speak your mind. You might start a new tradition. So.
It is timely, isn't it? Yeah.
Most timely.
I like that series of questions about, like, ask them about, how your views were formed, what experiences is behind them. That's great. That's a really important suggestion.
Right. And I like how she manages to make the whole Thanksgiving analogy last. She just hits it now and again. The gravy's getting cold, just to remind you. Right. It seems very, very sophisticated for a 15-year-old to me, but
yeah, me too.
Yeah. And, in terms of like the evidence she weaves in, I think, not that we don't know we're polarized, but that was a slightly new information for me, that maybe in 94, liberals didn't say that they believed only, that we've hardened our positions over the years. So anyway.
Yeah, I thought that was skillful too. I agree. Okay, how about one more?
Okay, here's my last one, and you'll see this one's also sadly extremely timely right now. And this one's by Narayan Dubey, who was 17 when he wrote it. And it's called Breaking the Blue Wall of Silence, Changing the Social Narrative About Policing in America. And he writes, as a child, I thought of police officers with veneration. If I saw a cop in the park, I felt safer. I told myself that when I got older, I'd be wearing the badge too. At 12 years old, I learned about police brutality. When I first saw the video of Eric Garner being thrown to the ground by police officers, I thought it was a movie. Despite knowing the officers were at fault, I refused to change my internal rhetoric. I thought the media was only portraying the bad side of the people I saw as heroes. Then, on July 31st, 2017, a police officer shot and killed my cousin, Isaiah Tucker, while he was driving. Isaiah wasn't just my cousin. He was also a young, unarmed African-American man. I no longer dreamt of becoming a police officer. But the issue is much larger than what happened to Isaiah. As highlighted in the New York Times, the Center of Policing Equity found that African Americans are 3.6 times more likely to experience force by police officers as compared to whites. Despite this blatant disproportionality, there's still overwhelming ignorance about it. Just last August, a group of people marched in Philadelphia countering Black Lives Matter protests with signs and chants of Blue Lives Matter. People are quick to challenge discussions of police violence with the idea that not all cops are bad cops. But when we argue in defense of the morality of individual police officers, we're undermining a protest of the larger issue, the unjust system of policing in the United States. When I met Wesley Lowery, a journalist from the Washington Post, he was adamant that the social narrative regarding police brutality in the US needs to change. Quote, conversations about police reform and accountability are about systems and structures, not about individuals, he said. It's not that some police officers aren't doing admirable things in our communities, but revering police for not abusing their power is dangerous. It normalizes police violence and numbs society to these issues. The idea that not all cops are bad cops belittles attempts to uproot the system. When we go out of our way to controvert this fight, we are perpetuating the inherent problems with racialized policing. So as you think about policing in America, think of Eric Garner, think of Alton Sterling, my cousin Isaiah, and the families that were left behind. We have a responsibility as citizens of this country to call out corruption and systems of power. Policing in America is rooted in racism, oppression, and privilege. It's time we recognize that. I learned to change my perspective, so can you.
What year was that?
It was 2019.
Yeah.
And I did get to interview him, and he said I needed permission from my whole family to write about this publicly, to put it out there about my cousin. And, my family thought that was a good way to honor him, to make this essay about him. So
super powerful. Also a really difficult, America's founded on individualism and, is a central value, and it's very, very hard to argue, as Black Lives Matters people will say, to talk about the system and the structure instead of the individuals. So
right. Exactly. The arguments he makes in this essay, what I was saying before, is like sometimes it's news to us, or you might read it before the summer of 2020 when everybody was in the streets, and have those thoughts for the first time, especially if you were a kid, in a high school somewhere. Which is the thrilling part about the idea of this book, that maybe each of these kids, teachers could assign their work and other kids could be studying it. And what a wild thing, so.
Well, they're inspiring. I think they are. Just to hear their thoughtfulness and their commitment to really important things. Change an individual mind or change a system, it's all there. Yeah. So it's pretty exciting, Katherine, to have these, and it's great to have them available in a book. So thanks for all the work that you did to put them together.
Yeah, the goal, of course, is for every kid to read the book and be like, wait, my perspective's not in here, and for them to write their own, and whether for our contest or anything else, because the work you guys do, you're trying to get them to write argument for the real world constantly. So if the working for the New York Times is such a funny thing, right? It just has outsized import, right? So the idea that Times journalists chose these is such a check plus, so such a gold star, right? Yeah. And so that's important for these kids, and sure. It's great that we can use the platform to do that. But I feel okay, those are the ones that came my way, but every teacher's seen these, right? Every teacher's got kids in their class that can do this, and for local things or whatever.
So viewers, I have some good news, and that as great as this has been to hear from Katherine and to hear the student work, we're not done yet. And we so be watching for another session with Katherine, and for National Writing Project teachers coming in the next months. Be on the lookout for that. And make sure that you can find the book, Norton, and order it. I think it's a fabulous resource for argument writing. And we'll hear more about that from the 4 teachers. And I wanted to thank you, Katherine, for your time, your efforts, and for reading the student essays. They were amazing and wonderful. And yes, I think students all over the country can do the same thing.
Me too. Well, thank you for having me. And I can't wait to hear what those 4 teachers do with the essays.
Me too. All right. Thanks everybody for watching.
Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.